So what does it actually look like when a human mind fractures? Like not in a therapist's office and definitely not in some medical textbook, but in real time right on a piece of paper.
Right, that's a completely different perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive where we're exploring exactly that. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape where, x-rays are completely useless. We have this single devastating piece of poetry titled The Echo of a Drowning Soul. And for you listening right now, our mission today is to really unpack the dense emotional landscape of these verses.
And it is incredibly dense. I mean, it's a masterclass in psychological compression, honestly.
Right. We're tracing how this author uses these shifting images, erratic punctuation, and, well, just these stark admissions to give a voice to profound trauma and isolation. Because while the source material is brief, it's intensely concentrated. It's almost like a compressed diamond of human pain.
That's a really good way to put it. We are looking at a relatively brief piece of writing, but every single line, every piece of punctuation is carrying the weight of a full traumatic event. The author somehow manages to crystallize the sprawling, chaotic experience of deep abuse into, just a few dozen lines.
Yeah, and knowing that, I really want to give you, our listener, a clear map of where we're heading today. This journey requires moving carefully through some very difficult, very raw emotional terrain.
Absolutely.
Before we can even begin to understand the devastating conclusion of the poem, we have to first look at the psychological state established right in the opening lines, because the author immediately traps the reader in this echoing chamber of self-doubt.
Yeah, the poem opens with this very distinct sense of physical and emotional exile. It says, cast a shard forever and ever alone in my room, and then immediately, did you ever really love me?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Right, the transition from the spatial reality of, being alone in my room to the desperate interpersonal questioning of, did you ever really love me? It happens in the blink of an eye. The speaker is physically solitary, but cognitively, they are entirely tethered to the person who abandoned them.
They're completely stuck on them.
Exactly. And they continue, you never loved being near me. I'm sad, scared. Where do you think you're going?
It's so visceral because they're basically throwing these questions into a completely empty room. It reminds me of the modern experience of sending a highly vulnerable text message.
Oh, yeah, the read receipt.
Yes. You see that read receipt, but the hours just tick by and no reply comes. And that silence isn't just an absence of noise, right? It functions as this active force. It becomes an acoustic mirror. Because the other person isn't answering, that silence just forces your own worst insecurities to bounce back at you.
That's a brilliant analogy, and the speaker is internalizing that silence completely.
Right, because they say, forever a runaway, forever a joke, a jokester. Did I do anything wrong? And then it escalates to, they say, I'm ashamed I didn't ever knew what I did, what I do.
The punctuation alone there just reveals a mind completely spinning out of its own orbit.
Yeah, the double question marks and the exclamation points.
Right. It signifies a frantic search for causality. Because when profound abandonment or trauma occurs, the human brain it cannot tolerate a void of meaning. It scrambles to find a logical reason for all that suffering.
And tragically, the easiest place to lay that blame is on yourself.
Exactly. By saying, I didn't ever knew what I did, the speaker is automatically assuming they're the variable that caused the abuse. It's actually a twisted form of control, if you think about it. If they are the problem, then theoretically they could fix it.
Wow, that makes so much sense. And that performative element really stands out to me when they call themselves forever a joke, and then specifically a jokester.
Yeah, jokester is such a strangely lighthearted word for such a bleak context.
Right. I mean, why use that word? Because a jokester is someone who entertains. It implies a performance, a deliberate effort to manipulate the mood of a room just to make people like them. So in the context of someone crying out, you never loved being near me, calling themselves a jokester is just a heartbreaking admission.
It really is.
They were twisting themselves into knots, performing for love, and the audience still walked out.
And that performative exhaustion, constantly playing the jokester and hyperanalyzing every past action to find the fatal flaw, it eventually just bankrupts the speaker's mental reserves. The brain simply cannot sustain that level of frantic, anxious output.
So what happens when it runs out?
Well, when the anxiety finally burns out, gravity takes over, the frantic questioning stops, and the sinking begins.
Ah, right. So that psychological bankruptcy drives the poem from the realm of mental anxiety into a deeply physical sensation of grief.
Yes, the metaphor shifts entirely to drowning.
Right, the text says, seriously cast me out my sunken heart so many times. And the typography completely shifts here. Suddenly we hit these massive strings of periods, these huge gaps in the text. The poem reads, how much it's drowned, and then just a huge trail of periods, my soul.
And notice the capitalization taking over the text, too. Drowned and my soul are just screaming off the page in all caps, surrounded by the decay of standard sentence structure.
It's so jarring.
In poetry, when syntax and grammar start to break down to this degree, it's actually cognitive mapping. The language center of the speaker's brain is literally failing to process the magnitude of the trauma, so the structural rules of grammar just fail right alongside it.
You know, reading those extended pauses, those long trails of periods, my brain physically runs out of breath. It feels like the text itself is drowning. Is the structural breakdown of these sentences intentionally mirroring the actual physical feeling of going underwater and losing oxygen?
Absolutely. The words are practically gasping for air. And in that suffocating state, the speaker immediately looks for a lifeline. The very next lines are, God, if only you could see this soul, this sunken heart. My tears ripped apart.
If only you could see this soul. That's so specific.
It is a desperate plea to a higher power. But like you said, look at the specific nature of the request. They are not asking God to pull them out of the water.
Wait, really?
Right, they are just asking God to see them. When an individual is entirely isolated in their suffering, the primary desire often shifts from rescue to simple witness. Having someone just acknowledge the reality of the pain validates the speaker's existence.
Wow. And that desire to be seen leads into what I think is, well, probably the most conceptually fascinating and painful part of the text.
The fragmentation.
Yeah. As the speaker sinks deeper into this metaphorical drowning, the act of sinking forces their very identity to fragment. The poem says, my soul is chopped, my soul intact, draining all day.
It's such a striking contradiction.
It really is. The text explicitly states the soul is both chopped and intact. But wait, it logically can't be both chopped and intact at the same time, right?
Well, physically, no. This is the survival paradox laid bare right on the page. In the physical realm, an object cannot be simultaneously chopped to pieces and perfectly intact. But in the landscape of severe psychological trauma, that duality is an everyday reality.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. Is it kind of like a car accident? You have a shattered windshield that is completely spiderwebbed with like a million intercepting cracks. It's ruined. The structural integrity of the glass is completely gone. That would be the chopped soul.
Right, exactly.
But somehow the glass is still holding its shape inside the metal frame of the car. It hasn't caved in. So it is, technically speaking, intact.
That is the perfect visualization of dissociation and trauma survival. Deep suffering can make a person feel violently fragmented by what they've endured. Their internal world is just shattered.
But they keep going.
Right, the physical body keeps waking up every morning. The heart keeps beating. They are physically and spiritually surviving the unsurvivable, which means the outer frame of the soul remains intact. And the contradiction between feeling internally destroyed while appearing externally functional, it's deeply, deeply alienating.
And furthermore, I mean, surviving like that requires a massive, invisible expenditure of energy, right? The sheer effort required to hold that shattered windshield together, to keep those chopped pieces intact so you can just function in society. That's a full-time job.
It is exhausting.
Which explains the very next words. Draining.
Yeah.
Draining all day.
Exactly. Draining implies a chronic, prolonged state. The trauma wasn't just the acute, violent event of being chopped. The ongoing trauma is the slow leak of psychological stamina required to endure the aftermath. It drains the life out of the speaker, drop by drop, all day long.
You can only hold that shattered glass together for so long before your hands give out. And the sheer exhaustion of trying to maintain this fractured self finally snaps the speaker's patience. The poem pivots so sharply here. It goes from this inward sorrow, the pleading, the sinking, the draining, into an outward projection of intense hostility.
The tonal shift is jarring, and it's immediate. The speaker suddenly demands erasure. They say, seriously, forget me, never, not a rough appointment me.
We transition from, did you ever really love me? Which is this highly vulnerable plea to be valued, to this hostile capitalized demand. Forget me. It's like a cornered animal, right? It stops whining and finally bares its teeth as a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
How does this anger actually serve as a protective shield for the speaker?
Well, anger is a very high-energy emotion. When someone is drowning in the passive, helpless state of grief, anger acts like an adrenaline shot. Demanding to be forgotten gives the speaker a false sense of agency.
Ah, so they're taking control.
Yes. They couldn't control the trauma that shattered them, but they can control pushing people away before those people have the chance to abandon them. Orchestrating the rejection becomes a protective mechanism. If you demand that people forget you, you insulate yourself from the disappointment of them eventually leaving.
That makes total sense. But the language the speaker uses to describe themselves in this isolation is particularly tragic. Never, not a rough appointment, me. The syntax there is just so intentionally clunky and broken.
It is. It's very jarring to read.
Because an appointment is a scheduled obligation. It's clinical, it's tedious, and often it's something people really dread. By defining themselves as a rough appointment, the speaker is expressing this tragic belief that they are nothing more than a burden.
Yeah, they don't view themselves as a friend or a partner.
Right. Not even a person worthy of casual interaction. They see their very existence as a difficult, unpleasant chore that other people are just forced to endure.
It's the ultimate internalization of abuse. They have absorbed the perspective of someone who found them completely worthless. But this hostility, this feeling of being a clinical burden, it's not just stemming from a general depression.
Oh, it's not.
The final shocking lines of this poem recontextualize everything we have analyzed up to this point. The text just snaps from abstract emotional pain into a highly specific, violent reality.
It's a massive reveal. The speaker directs all of that high-energy anger toward the absolute root of their fragmentation. The text reads, "Fuck you, rapists. You will fuck what you will never know."
It's devastating.
Suddenly, Alone in My Room is not just about a bad breakup or, general loneliness. It is the immediate suffocating aftermath of sexual assault. And Did I Do Anything Wrong is suddenly revealed as the insidious, crushing self-blame that victims of sexual violence are so often forced to carry.
The explicit naming of the abusers fundamentally shifts the power dynamic of the entire poem. For the first time, the speaker places the blame externally. You will fuck what you will never know is this profound reclamation of their inner humanity.
They're addressing the abusers directly.
Exactly, pointing out a fundamental disconnect. The abusers violated the physical body, but they never gained access to the core identity. They never touched or comprehended the complex, chopped, but intact soul we talked about earlier. The speaker's innermost self remained inaccessible, like an untouchable sanctum, even as the violence shattered the exterior.
It's an incredible act of defiance. The speaker is asserting that their true self survived the violation because the abusers were fundamentally incapable of recognizing it. But immediately following that defiance, we arrive at the final lines of the poem. And the conceptual weight of this ending completely upends the scope of the narrative. The poem concludes with a quote, "Everyone that was raped was me."
It is an ending that forces a complete rereading of the text.
It really does. Because the poem began with a highly personal, deeply isolated narrative. Alone in my room. Did you ever really love me? The speaker was entirely trapped within the boundaries of their own singular pain. And suddenly, in this final breath, those boundaries just evaporate. The speaker absorbs this massive collective burden. Does trauma erase the boundaries of the individual self so much that the speaker literally absorbs the pain of everyone who has suffered the same fate?
Sociologically speaking, severe catastrophic trauma often destroys the ego, the concept of the I. When your individual identity is systematically shattered by abuse, you no longer perceive yourself as a unique person moving through the world. You become essentially an avatar for the abuse itself.
Wow.
The isolation that began the poem morphs into its dark inverse. The speaker realizes that the only entity that truly understands their pain is the collective body of survivors who have endured the exact same violation. The boundaries between my pain and the world's pain entirely collapse.
So every echo of that specific trauma happening anywhere in the world resonates within their own drowning soul. They haven't just lost their personal boundaries. They have literally become the trauma itself. Everyone that was raped was me is a terrifying solidarity. It's this form of universal empathy born entirely out of destruction.
It forces the reader to realize that the drowning described throughout the poem isn't an individual sinking in a private pool of sorrow. It is a collective, boundless ocean of human trauma. The speaker is just one drop of water, recognizing that it is part of a devastating tide.
Tracing the causal journey of this deep dive, the architecture of this author's expression becomes incredibly clear. We started in that isolated room, watching the speaker exhaust their mental reserves through frantic performative questioning and self-blame.
Right, the jokester.
Exactly. We saw that psychological bankruptcy dragged them underwater, where the language literally gasped for air through broken syntax and capitalization. We examined the exhausting survival paradox of maintaining a soul that is simultaneously chopped and intact. We mapped the shift from passive grief into the high adrenaline anger of demanding to be forgotten. And finally, we confronted the total dissolution of the ego, where the individual speaker merges with every other victim of sexual violence.
It is a harrowing trajectory, but, I mean, it is also a testament to the resilience of human communication. These experiences, no matter how isolating they feel in the quiet of an empty room, are part of a larger shared reality. The trauma attempts to enforce silence, but the creation of the poem itself is an act of vocal defiance.
And for you, listening to this, you might wonder why we spend our time unpacking something so heavy and difficult. Like, why map the wreckage? Because understanding this kind of raw, unfiltered expression builds the kind of necessary empathy that facts and statistics simply cannot generate. It demonstrates how art and poetry serve as critical vessels for survival. When an individual's trying to survive the unsurvivable, when standard language fails and the diagnostic tools are completely useless, poetry provides a shape to the invisible. It gives a voice to the unspeakable.
By meticulously structuring the breakdown of their own mind, the author proves that even a drowning soul can find a way to communicate its exact coordinates in the depths.
Which leaves you with one final thought to mull over today on your own. Think carefully about the title of the piece, The Echo of a Drowning Soul. In the physical world, an echo does not happen in a void. It physically requires a surface to bounce off of in order to be heard.
Right.
If the speaker of this poem is entirely alone in their room, demanding to be forgotten, their voice has nothing to strike against. Are you, the reader, meant to be that surface? Is the very act of reading this poem, of bearing witness to this pain, the only way this incredibly private drowning transforms into a shared resonance?